50 years ago this week, 3 inmates managed to escape from Alcatraz prison, and it is one of the most enduring crime mysteries in U.S. history.
In the early hours of June 12, 1962, the world awoke to one of the most audacious and confounding prison breaks in American history.
3 bank robbers serving long terms scratched their way through grills covering an air vent, climbed a drainage pipe, and disappeared from the forbidding rock in San Francisco Bay.
From the icy waters of San Francisco Bay to the iron-clad cells of Alcatraz, 3 men vanished seemingly without a trace. Frank Morris, a brilliant and methodical mastermind, and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, whose determination and resourcefulness matched his own. Decades of speculation, media fascination, and countless theories have surrounded their disappearance. But a recent FBI report revealed what happened to the men who escaped Alcatraz in 1962. This story is as shocking and thrilling as any Hollywood could come up with. The men behind the escape. Frank Morris was born on September 1st, 1926, in Washington, D.C., to a woman named Clara, who had a turbulent and unstable life. Early childhood was difficult. By age 6, he was already stealing small amounts of money, rummaging through classmates' lunch boxes, a troubled behavior that escalated rapidly after his mother's visits. Orphaned by 11, Morris spent his adolescence in foster homes and reformatories. By 13, he was convicted of his first crime. In the ensuing years, his late teens and early adulthood, charges against him ranged widely, from narcotics possession to armed robbery and grand larceny. Morris's criminal career and repeated escape attempts earned him a reputation as a cunning escape artist. During a stint in the Louisiana State Penitentiary for a 10-year sentence related to robbery and substance offenses, he escaped in 1955, hitchhiking to freedom before being recaptured roughly a year later in Missouri during another burglary attempt. By January 18, 1960, Morris was transferred to Alcatraz under maximum security to allow no respite or escape. Now we know that it did not work. Morris's fellow escapees, John and Clarence Anglin, came from a very different but equally troubled background. The brothers originated from a large family of farm workers. They grew up with many siblings in conditions marked by poverty and hard labor. As children, John and Clarence developed physical toughness and a familiarity with water, swimming in icy Lake Michigan waters as kids, even when ice was floating on the surface. Their criminal activity began early, too. Clarence was first arrested at age 14 for breaking into a service station. In the early 1950s, John, Clarence, and their brother Alfred began robbing banks and other businesses, often when shops were closed, to minimize risk to bystanders. According to reports, in at least one robbery, they threatened employees with a toy gun rather than a real weapon. On January 17, 1958, the 3 brothers robbed the Columbia Savings Bank in Columbia, Alabama, a heist that netted them a significant amount of money, and it also landed them heavy prison sentences. As a result, John and Clarence were given long sentences. Official records show that John William Anglin was sentenced on February 10, 1958, to 10 years for bank robbery. He arrived at Alcatraz on October 24, 1960. Clarence Anglin, meanwhile, was sentenced to 15 years, or, according to some sources, up to 17 years for bank robbery, and arrived at Alcatraz on January 16, 1961. Their incarceration at Alcatraz brought together 3 men with overlapping histories: violent and non-violent crimes, repeated escapes or escape attempts, and a shared disdain for confinement. Alcatraz had been designed as America's ultimate maximum security prison, remote, surrounded by cold, shark-infested waters, and housing inmates perceived as especially dangerous or escape-prone. Morris, John, and Clarence found themselves in adjoining cells, a fact that would prove critical in their escape. For Morris, escape was more than a desire for freedom. It was almost a habit, a calling. His history of repeated incarcerations and prior prison breaks shows a pattern. Prison walls did not deter him. Rather, they sharpened his resolve. His intelligence, placing him in the top 2% of the general population, with an IQ around 133, made him uniquely suited to conceive and lead a complex escape plan. For John and Clarence Anglin, the desperation born out of poverty, a life of crime, and repeated failed escapes magnified the appeal of any chance at freedom, and the collusion with a mind like Morris felt like a rare and promising opportunity. Given the harsh conditions at Alcatraz, considering the strict routines, isolation, constant surveillance, small windowless cells, and an environment designed to crush hope, the psychological burden was immense. The combination of shared history, mutual distrust of confinement, and perhaps a sense of solidarity among the three men created a unique dynamic. They didn't just want out, they believed they could get out. Life at Alcatraz. Between 1934 and 1963, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, perched on Alcatraz Island, about 1.25 miles off the coast of San Francisco, was America's most notorious maximum security prison. The island's natural isolation, surrounded by the cold, frigid waters of San Francisco Bay, with strong tides and dangerous currents, made it uniquely formidable. The sea itself was part of the prison's security. When the federal government converted the old Army fortress into a penitentiary in 1934, it aimed to house the most difficult, escape-prone, or violent inmates, people other prisons could not safely contain. Cells were individual. Each prisoner had his own cell, separated from others, in a system built around control, isolation, and minimal privileges. At its peak, Alcatraz never held more than about 260 to 275 prisoners at a time, fewer than its full capacity of 336. That number represented less than 1% of the entire federal inmate population. It was essentially a prison within the prison system. Inside the walls of the rock, life was minimalist and regimented. A cell measured roughly 3 by 1.5 meters, equipped with a bed, a small sink, a toilet, a folding steel table, and a chair, basic provisions, and nothing more. The prisoners' rights were strictly limited to food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Everything else, including communication, recreation, visits, and even small comforts, was a privilege to be earned. The daily rhythm inside the prison was highly structured and monotonous. Prisoners were often awakened by a morning whistle, moved to breakfast, followed by scheduled work in the kitchen, laundry, or maintenance. Tasks ran from early morning until late. The lights went out at night. Many inmates spent up to 14 hours a day confined to their cells. Only minimal recreation was offered, and things like radios, newspapers, or unrestricted visitors were rare or conditional. Isolation was a hallmark of Alcatraz life. Many prisoners lacked meaningful contact with others. Privileges like letters, books, or recreation required good behavior and often took years of compliance to earn. For those who violated rules or attempted to resist, or simply fell into despair, the prison's punitive arm included segregation cells named the Hole. These cells could be icy, dark, with minimal light or ventilation, sometimes lacking even standard sanitation, especially in the older wings. Living in those conditions and the near-total removal of freedom and hope created psychological pressure. Many scholars and former inmates later described the isolation and monotony as psychologically crushing. Security protocols reinforced the sense of inescapability. Guards patrolled with rifles, pistols, and tear gas, Observation towers overlooked the cell blocks, and counts of prisoners occurred multiple times a day, as many as 13 times. Every tool and item was accounted for. Metal detectors and strict inventory controls meant contraband or improvised escape materials were extremely difficult to conceal. The combination of natural barriers and human-made controls, such as guard towers, check-ins, and locked cells, earned Alcatraz a reputation for being escape-proof. Yet beneath that oppressive order, prison life had a routine that, paradoxically, could lull inmates into patterns. Meals in the dining hall, conducted under strict protocols, whistle-driven movement, assigned seating, and regulated times formed predictable rhythmic anchors of the day. Work assignments offered some sense of purpose. Maintenance, kitchen duty, laundry, cleaning, all structured and repetitive. For prisoners conscious of time and opportunity, the monotony could also be seen as a hidden asset. Regular schedules meant routine movements, set guard shifts, predictable check-ins, details that could be studied, anticipated, maybe exploited. Moreover, despite the harshness, some inmates judged Alcatraz's strict uniformity as, in a twisted way, better than more chaotic prisons. The guaranteed food, shelter, and medical care, rare for many prisons of that era, gave a grim kind of security that some even requested. Perhaps ironically, the very harshness of Alcatraz forced prisoners to rationalize survival, compliance to earn small privileges, acceptance of dehumanizing conditions, and effort to preserve sanity through routine. Extreme discipline, isolation, rigid daily cycles, minimal sensory stimulation, constant surveillance, and natural isolation by water shaped the minds of many. For certain inmates, especially those used to criminal life or repeated incarceration, Alcatraz's harsh regimen meant two things. One was destruction of spirit, the other was strengthening of resolve. Faced with the monotony and suppression of freedom, some began to view escape not just as a crime, but as an assertion of identity and autonomy. The very predictability and limitations built into Alcatraz might have fostered in some of its prisoners a burning focus, the desire to reclaim spontaneity, to rewrite the rules, to find a gap, a moment, a flaw. By 1963, after nearly 3 decades of housing the country's most dangerous criminals under this blend of natural isolation and structured oppression, Alcatraz was closed. The reason was not escape successes. There were none confirmed. Rather, the cost of maintaining the prison proved prohibitively high. Fresh water, food, supplies, everything had to be transported by boat. According to records, Alcatraz cost roughly 3 times more to operate than comparable mainland federal prisons. On March 21, 1963, the prison shut its doors, transferring inmates elsewhere. But not before the legendary escape unfolded. Planning and executing the 1962 escape. Planning for the escape from Alcatraz began months before the escape. The 3 men, housed in adjoining cells in Cell Block B at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, collaborated to widen a ventilation grate in the back wall of their cells, a grate that led into an unguarded utility corridor behind the cell block. Their tools of choice were humble and inconspicuous. Metal spoons from the mess hall sharpened to chip away at concrete, discarded saw blades, nail clippers, and eventually a drill they improvised from the motor of a stolen vacuum cleaner. Night after night, under the cover of darkness, they worked slowly, removing concrete and expanding vents big enough for a man to crawl through. To hide their progress, they constructed false vent covers out of painted cardboard or similar materials, which mimicked the original grills. Once the vents were widened and access to the corridor established, Morris, the Anglins, and an accomplice inmate, Alan West, converted the seldom-used utility corridor into a clandestine workshop. There, over weeks, they used stolen raincoats, more than 50 in total, to produce a makeshift 6 by 14-foot rubber raft, life vests, and paddles. They stitched the seams together by hand and used heat from prison steam pipes to vulcanize the rubber, a technique they gleaned from magazines available to inmates. Wooden paddles were fashioned from scraps, and one inmate even adapted a small concertina, which is a type of squeeze-box instrument, to function as a bellows for inflating the raft and vests. To preserve the illusion of normality until the moment of escape, they created remarkably realistic dummy heads. These were made from a mixture of soap, concrete dust, toilet paper, painted flesh tone, and topped with real human hair collected discreetly from the prison barber shop. By placing these on their pillows each night, with blankets, towels, and clothing piled beneath, they gave the appearance of sleeping inmates during head counts. By the evening of June 11, 1962, all elements were in place. Lights out occurred around 9:30 p.m. With dummy heads in place and their minimal gear carried through the vented corridor, Morris and the Anglin brothers began their escape. They left their cells in the hidden service corridor behind Block B, then climbed a network of plumbing pipes and support structures some 30 feet up to reach the roof of the cell house. Once on the roof, they removed rivets from a large fan grill over a ventilation shaft, replacing them temporarily with dummy rivets made from soap to avoid detection. After emerging onto the roof, the trio traversed roughly 100 feet of rooftop, then descended about 50 feet via an exterior kitchen vent pipe, sliding down to the ground near the prisoners' shower building, according to reconstructed escape paths. From there, they cut through two 12-foot barbed wire fences, scaled them, and scrambled down a steep embankment to reach the northeast shoreline of the island, near the power plant. This section was poorly covered by searchlights and guard towers. At the shore, they inflated their raincoat raft using the adapted concertina as a bellows, donned their homemade life vests, and prepared the paddles. According to official records, the launch occurred at approximately 11:40 p.m. The intended route was first to paddle to nearby Angel Island, then, after resting, to swim across the straits to Marin County, hoping to steal a car and new clothes before dispersing. In the early hours of June 12, 1962, during the routine bed check, guards discovered the dummy heads instead of sleeping prisoners. Alarm bells rang, and a prison-wide lockdown followed immediately. In the days that followed, investigators recovered bits of evidence that confirmed at least part of the escape's material strategy. On shorelines near the bay, pieces of wood resembling paddles, bits of rubber inner tubing, and even a homemade life vest washed up. A paddle and a scrap of raincoat rubber consistent with the escapees' gear were found near Angel Island, over a mile from Alcatraz. Despite this, the main raft was never recovered. No bodies, no confirmed landfall, no definitive sightings. What stands out most is not just the boldness of the escape, but the adaptability and cunning required to realize it under constant risk of detection. From spoons sharpened in secret to vulcanization of rubber, from papier-mâché heads to crude plumbing climbs, the escape demonstrates the extremes to which humans will go to reclaim freedom. FBI investigation and official findings. On June 12, 1962, the morning bed check at Alcatraz revealed that 3 inmates, Frank Morris and brothers John Anglin and Clarence Anglin, were missing from their cells, replaced by lifelike dummy heads made of plaster, paint, and real hair, placed on their pillows as decoys. The discovery triggered an immediate lockdown and the involvement of federal authorities. The prison counted its inmates many times a day under strict security. The escape was unprecedented in its apparent success. The FBI, along with local and maritime authorities, launched an extensive manhunt. Within 2 days of the escape, a packet of rubber-sealed letters connected to the fugitives was recovered. Investigators canvassed relatives, background records, and nationwide databases for any trace of the men, and alerted boat operators in the San Francisco Bay to watch for debris or suspicious vessels. Over the ensuing days, search teams, including prison authorities, the Coast Guard, and local law enforcement, combed the bay and surrounding beaches. Some physical fragments were found: paddle-like pieces of wood, bits of rubber inner tube, and a homemade life vest reportedly washed up on beaches such as Cronkite Beach. Investigators also matched a wooden paddle recovered on shore to bolts identical to those used in a paddle found in the prison, suggesting part of the escape craft had floated away. Despite these clues, the main raft was never retrieved, and no bodies were recovered. The harsh conditions of the bay, cold water, strong currents and tides, weighed heavily in analyses. Water temperatures in the bay commonly ranged between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit, about 10 to 13 degrees Celsius, a level considered dangerous for prolonged exposure. Over the next 17 years, countless leads, reports, and possible sightings were pursued by the FBI and local agencies, but none yielded irrefutable proof of survival, death, or the location of the escapees. On December 31, 1979, the FBI officially closed its case file on the escape after nearly 2 decades of investigation. Their conclusion: the most likely outcome was that Morris and the Anglin brothers drowned in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay as their makeshift raft disintegrated, and their bodies were carried out to sea by currents. Nonetheless, responsibility for the case was transferred to the United States Marshals Service, which kept the fugitives on its wanted list, meaning the case was not declared definitively closed in the eyes of law enforcement. Over the ensuing decades, the possibility that the 3 men survived the escape has continued to tantalize investigators, family members, journalists, and the public. In 2013, a handwritten letter was sent to the San Francisco Police Department, allegedly from John Anglin. The letter claimed that all 3 men made it out alive. Morris supposedly died in 2008, Clarence in 2011, and John wrote that he was living under an assumed identity, suffering from cancer, and would surrender if assured a prison sentence no longer than 1 year plus medical treatment. The letter was handed over to the Marshals Service and tested by the FBI lab for fingerprints, DNA, and handwriting comparison. The results were formally declared inconclusive. The Marshals later stated that they consider the letter without merit. In 2014, the Marshals Service released age-progressed composite images of what John and Clarence Anglin might look like in their 70s and 80s. Over the years, other unverified reports have surfaced: alleged sightings abroad, supposed footprints near landing areas, and anecdotal family lore, including claims that the Anglin's mother received roses signed by her sons in the years following the escape. Yet none of these claims have yielded verifiable forensic evidence accepted by authorities. Culturally, the 1962 escape of Morris and the Anglin brothers became legendary. Their breakout from a prison considered inescapable, so secure that between 1934 and 1963, 14 escape attempts involving 36 men had failed or been thwarted, immortalized the trio in history. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.